that man's chest. Now, would a New York Times reporter really be here at 1 a.m, you arrogant fuck, just to talk to your sorry ass? Then Sinigi drove away from the murder scene. The death of Agent Graham wasn't a big deal to him. Not really. He'd killed over 200 people before this one. Practice makes perfect. It wouldn't be the last time, either. This one would wake everybody up, though. He just hoped they had somebody better waiting in the wings. Otherwise, where was the fun? The challenge? How could this get bigger than the Lindbergh kidnapping? Chapter 12. I was already becoming emotionally involved with the kidnapped children. My sleep was restless and agitated that first night. In my dreams, I replayed several bad scenes at the school. I saw Mustaf Sanders again and again. His sad eyes stared out at me, asking for help, getting none from me. I woke to find both my kids in bed with me. At some time during the early morning, they must have snuck aboard. It's one of their favorite tricks, their little jokes on Big Daddy. Damon and Janelle were fast asleep on top of a patchwork quilt. I'd been too wasted to pull it off the bed the night before. We must have looked like two resting angels and a fallen plow horse. Damon is a beautiful little boy of 6, who always reminds me of how special his mother was. He has Maria's eyes. Janny is the other apple of my eye. She's 4, going on 15. She likes to call me Big Daddy, which sounds like some black slang she's managed to invent. Maybe she knew the football star Big Daddy Lipscomb in some other life. Also on the bed was a copy of William Styron's book on his depression, Darkness Visible, which I'd been reading. I was hoping it might give me some clue to help me get over my own depression, which had plagued me ever since Maria's murder. 3 years now. Felt like 20. What actually woke me that morning were headlights fanning across the window blinds. I heard a car door bang and the fast crunch of feet on gravel in the driveway. Careful not to wake the kids, I slipped over to the bedroom window. I peered down on 2 Metro DC patrol cars parked behind the old Porsche in our drive. It looked miserably cold outside. We were just entering the deepest hollow of DC's winter. "Give me a break," I mumbled into the chilly window blinds. "Go away." Samson was heading for the back door to our kitchen. It was 20 to 5 on the clock next to the bed. Time to go to work. Just before 5 that morning, Samson and I pulled up in front of a crumbling pre-war brownstone in Georgetown, a block west of M Street. We had decided to check out Siniji's apartment ourselves. The only way to get stuff done right is to do it yourself. Lights are all on. "Looks like somebody's home," Samson said as we climbed out of the car. "Now who could it be?" 3 guesses. "The first 2 don't count," I mumbled. I was suffering from early morning queasiness. A visit to the monster's den wasn't going to help. "The FBI. Maybe Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. is up there," Samson guessed. "Maybe they're filming real stories from the FBI. Let's go see." We entered the building and took the narrow, winding stairway up. On the second floor, yellow crime scene tape had been placed in a crisscross pattern across the doorway to Siniji's apartment. It didn't look like the place where a Mr. Chips would live. More like a Richard Ramirez or a Green River Killer. The scarred wooden door was open. I could see 2 FBI techies working inside. A local DJ called the Grease Man was screeching from a radio on the floor. "Hey, Pete, what's doing?" I called inside. I knew one of the FBI techies on the job, Pete Schweitzer. He looked up at the sound of my voice. "Well, look who's here. Welcome to the inner sanctum." "We came over to bother you, see how it's done," Samson said. We'd both worked with Pete Schweitzer before. Liked and trusted him as much as you could any FBI personnel. "Come in and make yourselves at home at Casa Siniji." This is my fellow fly shit finder and bagger, Todd Toohey. Todd likes to listen to the Grease Man in the AM. These two are ghouls like us, Toddy. The best, I told Todd Toohey. I had already started to nose around the apartment. Everything was feeling unreal again. There was this cold, damp spot inside my head. Eerie time. The small studio apartment was a mess. There wasn't much furniture. A bare mattress on the floor, an end table and lamp, a sofa that looked as if it had been picked up off the street. But the floor was covered with things. Wrinkled sheets and towels and underwear were a large part of the general chaos. 2 or 3 loads of laundry was spilled out on the floor. Most of the clutter was books and magazines, though. Several hundred books, and at least that many magazines were piled in the single small room. "Anything interesting so far?" I asked Schweitzer. "You looked through his library?" Schweitzer talked to me without looking up from a pile of books he was dusting. "Everything is interesting. Check out the books along the wall. Also, consider the fact that our fine feathered friend wiped down this whole fucking apartment before he split." "He do a good job? Up to your standards?" "Excellent job. I couldn't have done much better myself. We haven't found a partial print anywhere, not even on any of those goddamn books." "Maybe he reads with plastic gloves on," I offered. "I think he might. I shit you not. Place was dusted by a pro, Alex." I was crouched near several stacks of the books now. I read the titles on several of the spines. Most of it was non-fiction from the last 5 years or so. "True crime fan," I said. "Lots and lots of kidnapping stories," Schweitzer said. He looked up and pointed. "Right side of the bed, near the reading lamp. That's the kidnapping section." I walked over and looked at the volumes. Most of the books had been stolen from the library at Georgetown. I figured he must have had an ID to get into the stacks there. Was he a past student? Maybe a professor? Several computer printouts were taped to the bare wall over his private library on kidnapping. I started to read down the lists. Aldo Moro, kidnapped in Rome. 5 bodyguards killed during abduction. Moro's body found in a parked car. Jack Teich, released after payment of $750,000. J. Reginald Murphy, editor of the Atlanta Constitution, released after payment of $700,000. J. Paul Getty III, released in southern Italy after $2.8 million ransom paid. Mrs. Virginia Piper of Minneapolis, released after her husband paid $1 million. Victor E. Samuelson, released in Argentina after payment of $14.2 million ransom. I whistled as I spotted the amounts on his list. What was he going to ask for Maggie Rose Dunn and Michael Goldberg? It was a really small place, and there hadn't been much room for Sinigi to wipe off fingerprints. Still, Schweitzer said he hadn't left anything. I wondered if Sinigi could have been a cop. That was one way to plan a crime and maybe improve your chances of getting away with it. "Come here for a minute." Samson was in the bathroom that was off to one side of the tiny studio. The walls were papered with photos from magazines, newspapers, record albums, book jackets. He'd left a final surprise for us. There were no fingerprints, but he had scrawled a message. Just over the mirror was a typeset headline. "I want to be somebody." Up on the walls was an exhibition. I saw River Phoenix and Matt Dillon. There were photos from Helmut Newton books. I recognized Lennon's murderer Mark David Chapman and Axl Rose. Pete Rose was up on the wall, too. And Neon Deion Sanders. Wayne Williams was there. And newspaper stories. The Happy Land Social Club fire in New York City. A New York Times story of the Lindbergh kidnapping. A story about the kidnapping of Samuel Bronfman, the Seagram's heir, and a story about the missing child, Eitan Pates. I thought about Sinigi the kidnapper, all alone in his desolate apartment. He had carefully wiped every inch of space for fingerprints. The room itself was so small, so monkish. He was a reader, or at least liked to have books around. Then there was his photo gallery. What did it tell us? Leads. Misdirections. I stood in front of the mirror that was over the sink and stared into it, as I knew he had many, many times. What was I supposed to see? What had Gary Saniji seen? This was his picture on the wall. The face in this mirror. I offered a theory to Samson. It's the key picture here, the central one. He wants to be the star of all this. Samson was leaning against a wall of photos and news clippings. Why no fingerprints, Dr. Freud? He must know we have his fingerprints on file somewhere. Makes me think he may have been wearing some kind of disguise at the school. Maybe he put on makeup right here before he went off to school. He could be a stage actor. I don't think we've seen his face yet. I think the boy has big plans. He definitely wants to be a star, Samson said. I want to be somebody. Chapter 13. Maggie Rose Dunn had awoken from the strangest sleep of her life. Horrible and indescribable bad dreams. She felt as if everything around her were moving in slow motion. She was thirsty. She needed to pee awfully bad. I'm too tired this morning, Mom. Please. I don't want to get up. Don't want to go to school today. Please, Mom. I don't feel so good. Honest, I really don't, Mommy. Maggie Rose opened her eyes. At least she thought she had opened her eyes, but she couldn't see anything. Nothing at all. Mommy! 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 Maggie finally screamed and couldn't stop screaming. For an hour after that, at least that long, she floated in and out of consciousness. She felt weak all over. She floated like a leaf on the hugest river. The currents just took her wherever they wanted. She thought about her mom. Did she know Maggie was gone? Was she looking for her now? She had to be looking for her. Maybe someone took her arms and legs off. She couldn't feel them. It must have been long ago. It was black. She must be buried in the ground. She must be rotting and becoming a skeleton. Was that why she couldn't feel her arms and legs? Am I going to be like this forever? She couldn't stand that, and she was crying again. She was so confused, she couldn't think at all. Maggie Rose could open and close her eyes, though. At least she thought she could. But there was just no difference with her eyes open or closed. Everything was darkness. Either way. If she did it over and over, opened and closed her eyes real fast, she saw color. Now, inside the blackness, she saw streaks and tiers of color, mostly red and bright yellow. Maggie wondered if she might be strapped or tied down. Was that what they really did to you inside a casket? Did they strap you down? Why would they do that? To stop you from getting out of the ground? To keep your spirit under the earth forever and ever? Suddenly she remembered something. Mr. Saniji. A little of the fog that swirled around her cleared away for a second. Mr. Saniji had taken her out of school. When had it happened? Why? Where was Mr. Saniji now? And Michael? What had happened to Michael? They had left school together. She remembered that much. She moved then, and the most amazing thing happened. She discovered that she could roll herself over. That's what Maggie Rose did. She rolled over and was suddenly up against something. She could feel her whole body again. She still had a body to feel. She was absolutely certain she had her body and that she wasn't a skeleton. And Maggie screamed. She had rolled into someone or something. Someone else was there in the dark with her. Michael? It had to be Michael. Michael? Maggie's voice was so low it was barely a whisper. Michael? Is that you? She waited for an answer.